As players log into the familiar pandemic-era theater arena that is Zoom, we are met with a screen-shared visual of a black and white animated sketch of the waiting room of the Sleep Institute. A clock ticks away. There are magazines and an empty leather chair on the perimeter of the room. A lab technician rushes past, hurrying us to the sleep chamber. Although the lab tech's tone is light, it's clear that the players have an important job to do. While we're being configured in the sleep chamber, we're told to close our eyes and rest our hands on our phones, opened to the Cohort app, an interactive multiple choice type app designed by artist and programmer Jacob Niedzwiecki. We're told to breathe deeply, and then we are told to open our eyes. Did you know that you're lucid dreamers? The lab tech assures us that although we are sleeping, our skills as lucid dreamers are desperately needed here. In the next room over from me, there's a person sleeping, he says. We're connecting you with them. We need you to communicate to them that Jacob is cut off. This is in your hands. We fall into a wormhole. We don't know what we're doing. The sketchy aesthetic goes black, and when the feed returns, we see a live video of a man in a room alone. We see the captive Calvin sleeping soundly in a bed in a barely furnished room. Along with the sleeping Calvin, there is a chair, a desk, a phone, a lamp, and a few objects on the desk. Suddenly, a command appears on Cohort, the app. Wake up. Players are instructed to take a turn. Someone selects wake up. We immediately see the player's choice in Cohort reflected in Calvin's gestures. Calvin rises as if being operated by a controller. The 4 lucid dreamer players take turns using Cohort to select actions from a drop-down menu to prescribe to Calvin. Brush your teeth, eat breakfast, meditate, write a song, pray aloud, play trashketball. The immediacy in this process is as remarkable as it is unnerving. Calvin is an avatar, and we as a collective are taking turns playing his life. After a few turns of passing the figurative controller, when it's my turn, a message appears to me. At 6 a.m. the next morning, this person is to die. We leave it to you to tell them or not. So I unmute myself when directed. I read my line, telling Calvin that he will die tomorrow. As Calvin and the players grapple with what's next, new options begin to appear on the drop-down menu of Cohort. Attempt escape, call for help, psych yourself up, as well as promise organs. Then a new option appears, sleep. If selected, Calvin sleeps. And if Calvin sleeps, Calvin dreams. If Calvin dreams, a series of, quote, 5 fantastical, imaginative, extraordinary, fun, ridiculous, mundane, profound games begin. Again, taking turns on a controller, players are invited to play these games, each one modeled after a classic tabletop or video game, puzzles, traversals, RPGs, character creators, etc. Each game reanimates a specific memory in Calvin's life prior to his time in this room where we met him. We play the first day of school and his first job interview. On the other end of Zoom, as you can see, the games are tactile. They use mirrors and cardboard and manual operation. One player directs a set of hands to move a figurine through a cardboard map. Another player selects outfits in a mirror like we're dressing a sim. You'll see here in this picture, this is actor Amaka Ume, who also played the role of the actor in some of the performances. After the last game, Calvin awakens and the players find themselves back in the cell-like room at 5 a.m. The player who didn't get to play a game chooses what Calvin is to do with his final hour. After Calvin completes the final task, he opens the door and exits the room. The screen goes dark and the players find themselves back in the Sleep Institute. Then, in a room, we see a family huddled around an old man in a hospital bed. It's clear that he is sick or dying. As you can see, a child outlined in red leans into the door frame, smiles at us, and the itinerary, a playtest, is over. So part of my intense interest in this show centers around an anecdote from another performance that happened during the 2020 run of the itinerary at the Kick and Push Festival. So when a friend of mine attended a different performance than me, I asked him about the 5 dream games and asked him which one he played. He looked at me very confused. During his show, he and the other lucid dreamers stayed in the room with Calvin. They kept prescribing him tasks for the whole experience. Although I knew that this experience was being marketed as an iterative playtest, I wondered why this group missed more than half of the show. I prod, confused, but also acknowledging the potential multiplicities of participatory performance. How did you play? What happened when you told Calvin to sleep? What happened next? Turns out When those four players were invited to let Calvin sleep and ultimately let Calvin dream, no one selected that option. No one invited Calvin to sleep. Players continued to play his life, selecting options like do push-ups, write a song, play trashkaball. Calvin never slept, so Calvin never dreamed. So Calvin, and importantly, the players, stayed in his room. Before I continue, I really want to offer my sincere gratitude to the generosity of Sebastien Heins, the creator of this piece, and the team at Outside the March. It's been a real pleasure to think about this work over 2 years, and I know I'll continue to do so. So thank you so much for the conversations that we've had together. The Itinerary, a playtest, as I mentioned, is created by Sebastien Heins and the team Outside the March, and it is a live, interactive, narrative-based game that is controlled by the audience. In the words of the creators, the Itinerary, quote, puts the life of a person in the hands of an audience and brings the value of minutes and seconds to the front of their mind. Over the span of 24 hours is 24 minutes, audiences can safely play with questions of mortality, the illusion of choice, and the consequences of inaction. As I mentioned, I saw the Itinerary, a playtest online at the Kick and Push Festival in August 2020, but I understand the piece continues to iterate under a new name, which is now called Game Boy Mother. In the published excerpt of the Itinerary playtest in Canadian Theatre Review, Calvin's room is described as, quote, a prison cell, and it is not. The room appears clinical, calm, timeless, and molded at the same time. In conversation and in publication, Heins has been unspecific about the piece's connection to abolitionist values around the prison industrial complex. In an interview, Sebastien said to me, quote, speaking more thematically, a limit is imposed on the degree to which we situate a Black body in a space that could appear to speak about the prison industrial complex. Sebastien is clear in his conversations with me that this piece wasn't only a meditation on the prison industrial complex, but it's rather an investigation of the, quote, question of the piece being, quote, what do we do with the time that we have? In form, the Itinerary is a participatory game where audiences play episodes of a character's isolated life in past, present, and future through an app like a remote control. This participation, this audience participation, imbues the piece with a sense of agency, culpability, and most importantly, consequence. In content, the Itinerary tells a story of liberation as a collective pursuit that happens in a reckoning in the space between awake and asleep, between memory and future. While we work together through Calvin's past and present, we open the doors and invite him out of the room. The Itinerary, a playtest, embodies abolitionist values around culpability, consequence, community, and the necessity of both a material and conceptual practice. The play presents a productive tension between a form that embraces agency and choice and a story that explores memory, dreaming, and liberation. So as mentioned, my PhD is concerned with investigating abolitionist dramaturgies in action. I wonder in what ways is the theatrical imagination, as a space that already houses practices like performance, rehearsal, liveness, relation, is already participating in abolitionist values. I'm interested in the main question of the piece, as Sebastien asked, as an abolitionist question, quote, what do we do with the time that we have? What do we do with the time that we have? How do we as a collective reckon with what Ruth Wilson Gilmore calls, quote, the abolition of space by time that happens to incarcerated people in the carceral landscape? So abolition more generally, practiced and pioneered by Black, Indigenous, and people of color internationally, abolition explores ways to redefine how we relate to each other without relying on carceral punishment, creating a world that defines relations without the need for police and prisons. Abolition is both an immediate and a material call for freedom, and also a conceptual call to rethink the ways we relate to one another, especially in the terms of racism, colonial capitalism, and class. In the words of abolitionist matriarch Ruth Wilson Gilmore, oops, there we go, thank you. Abolition is figuring out how to work with people to make something rather than figuring out how to erase something. Abolition is a theory of change. It's a theory of social life. Abolitionist thought offers a formal theoretical methodology to investigate performance as a potential liberatory form. So speaking about form first, in the Itinerary, action and consequence are audienced by the collective playing. Participating audiences are juggling this kind of vulnerability when they're immersed in the frame. They become a character while still staying as themselves in different ways than we recognize in bourgeois theater. Coleridge's call for suspending disbelief gets complicated when I'm playing with the controller. I'm playing as Mariah, the lucid dreamer, as Mariah, the attender of Kick and Push Festival, and as Mariah, the abolitionist. In the itinerary, participatory community holds these players accountable to consequences. There is a kind of community witnessing in passing the controller. In Jill Dolan's book, Utopia and Performance, she argues that, quote, live performance provides a place where people come together, embodied and passionate, to share experiences of meaning making and imagination that can describe or capture fleeting intimations of a better world. Dolan draws on the work in her book of Richard Schechner and Victor Turner in this regard too, looking to theatrical event as an arena for a kind of working it out together that many liberatory pursuits like abolition require. In participatory dramaturgies like this one, players are actually sharing the meaning making while they share the controller. At the core of abolition is a collective redefinition of relationality. So because participatory theater, like the itinerary in this case, functions as a public and peopled and immediate and relational experience that is full of actual consequences, it invites the arena necessary for the kind of collective awareness that has to happen in abolition. Players take turns making choices in view of a gathered community. And in the case of the performance that actually stayed in Calvin's cell, collectively players shared the consequences of each other's choices. They didn't leave the room. They missed half the show. I would argue that although you can't win something like the itinerary, you can kind of lose. The itinerary consequenced its players by keeping the dreams, the games, and ultimately the freedom from both the players and from Calvin. The play didn't actually continue as usual, depending on the choices we made. The worlds of the play and the experiences of the players were changed materially. So now on to content. Whereas formally the itinerary employs participation, play, and game, in content, the piece happens in a dream. From the very beginning of the show, you're put to sleep as a lucid dreamer. Thematically, this relationship between agency and action in form is complicated really beautifully by sleep and dreaming in the itinerary. Formally, the participatory element stresses action and consequence and culpability, but the content is about sleep and dreaming. The play utilizes this productive tension to speak to the complexities as dreaming as an action in abolitionist work. Abolitionist thought is rife with conversations around the power of dreaming and reimagining a new world. Dreams are vivid imaginations of new worlds before they're built. My thinking about dreams is really rooted in Rob and D.G. Kelly's foundational work, Freedom Dreams. When speaking about, there we go. Oh, sorry. Oops. There we go. Sorry. When speaking about dreams, Kelly says, quote, that the idea that we could possibly go somewhere that exists only in our imagination, the map to a new world is in the imagination, in what we see in our third eye, rather than just in the desolation around us. For Kelly, dreams are the generative aspects of abolition, like Ruth Wilson Gilmore said, the creative aspects of abolition. For Calvin too. Without new visions or dreams, Kelly says, we wouldn't know what to build. We only know what to knock down. We would not only end up confused, rudderless, and cynical, but we forget that making a revolution is not just a series of clever maneuvers and tactics, but a process that can and must transform us. Engaging with dreams is a transformative potential. Kevin Quashie says, quote, the act of imagining is the practice and willingness to dream, speculate, wonder, and it helps us move beyond the limits of reality. And I see this same kind of moving beyond the limits happening in a piece like The Itinerary. Also, dreams are of the past, of the present, and of the future. We dream things we know and experience, but we also dream in surreal. Dreams exist in imagination. In The Itinerary, we are engaging with Calvin in his past, as a young man in isolation in the room, but even further into his past through the RPG games and games we play about his memory. We also meet him in the future. We meet him sleeping in the sketched version of the Sleep Institute with his family. If we allow Calvin to sleep, we as lucid dreaming players tend to his past together to let him out of the room. Similar to The Itinerary, the abolitionist dream is rooted both in memory, like these games that we're playing with Calvin, and in our collaborative, future-oriented approaches to the problem at hand. Abolitionist Jackie Wang says it's necessary to rely on dreams to do some of this work of abolition. In quote, imagining and working towards a world without prisons, which is the project of prison abolition, would not only require us to fundamentally rethink the role of state in society, but it would also require us to work towards the total transformation of all social relations. A project as lofty and ambitious as this is easy to dismiss as unrealistic, utopian, in practice, naive, an unrealistic dream. I believe that theatrical interventions like the itinerary gives us the controller to explore ways that this dream actually can be realistic. Disability justice scholar and theater artist Leah Lakshmi Piepzna Samara Sinha, which I know some folks in this room are fans of as well, she names her stage as a space for, quote, prefigurative politics, or the actual manifestation of, in her case, disabled, queer, trans, Black, Indigenous, people of color dreams. Different from the Brechtian impulse to like shake us up and disrupt the audience from their dream towards social action, Piepzna Samara Sinha's interest is in theater as a space to stage a prefigurative utopia and stage a dream of a new world. This feels similar to what Heins is proposing in the itinerary. For Piepzna Samara Sinha, quote, her favorite performance spaces are spaces that become temporary 2-hour communities that are autonomous zones that feel like freedom. Being in them, we can see and smell and taste and feel things that we've always wanted, but rarely witnessed, both in what we see on stage and how we interact and participate as an audience that serves as a collective of witnesses. The itinerary presents a stage to materialize these dreams in collective, in play. Abolitionist dramaturgies necessitate emergence because abolition is an active practice interested in the world as it's becoming in both content and form. The itinerary is an example of abolitionist dramaturgies. As discussed above, the formal organization of the itinerary as a game, as a participatory game with outcomes and consequences, means that this drama is actually affected by the actions and behaviors of players. As discussed above, situating the itinerary between lucidity and dreaming straddles that conceptual space that's necessary to imagine and ultimately create new worlds. The itinerary is both a game with material consequences and an exploration of liberation. Abolitionist dramaturgies are also emergent because they present, quote, ways for human beings to practice being in right relationship to our home and to each other, to practice complexity, to grow a compelling future together through relatively small interactions. Theater is a relatively small interaction when it comes to the wake of a new world without police and prisons. I'm specifically interested in how theater can act as this space to practice complexity within abolition, and as Heins puts it, to, quote, safely explore culpability and potential within the abolitionist imagination. I want to close on a question that I have through my continued PhD research, which is, I acknowledge the problematics associated with safety that the frame brings us, especially as a white settler who has not been incarcerated, who is engaging with abolitionist dramaturgies. Thinking about abolition in the realm of representational forms like theater has the potential to delegitimize the immediacy associated with abolition, free them all, pushing world building dangerously into the realm of metaphor. This question of stakes continues to be paramount in my continued investigation of abolitionist dramaturgies, and I'm charged to always echo the call of Eve Tuck and Kei-Wei Yang and resist thinking about liberation in just metaphor. I continue asking, like scholar Jill Dolan, quote, how can theater make transformation material rather than just metaphorical? How can works like the itinerary actually usher in a new world? Like Brecht, Heins asserts that people can still expect new worlds to materialize in front of them here at the theater, but they must sit forward and change the way that they play their life for the sake of others in our community. For Brecht, we're holding a cigar, but for Heins and his team at the itinerary, we're holding our own phones. Thank you so much.